The eviction notice came on a Tuesday, taped to the door of the studio apartment with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested the landlord had done this many times before. Elena Rodriguez stood in the hallway with her daughter Maya pressed against her side, reading the words that confirmed what she'd already known for weeks. 30 days. Then they'd be out on the street with nowhere to go. Maya was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark eyes that seemed too serious for a child. She clutched her backpack with both hands, the zipper broken on one side, and held together with a safety pin Elena had carefully threaded through the fabric that morning. The bag contained everything Maya valued in the world. 3 library books about space exploration, a notebook filled with drawings of stars and planets, and a worn stuffed elephant named Cosmo that had been with her since she was 2. "Mom, is this about the rent again?" Maya's voice was quiet, already learning to speak softly about the things that hurt. Elena pulled the notice down and folded it carefully, as if treating it with respect might somehow change its contents. "Yeah, baby, it's about the rent." They'd been living in the studio for 8 months, ever since Elena's hours at the diner had been cut, and she'd lost the one bedroom they'd had before. The studio was too small, too expensive, and located in a building where the heat worked sporadically and the water pressure was a daily gamble. But it had been theirs. It had been shelter. And now, even that was slipping away. Elena worked 2 jobs. Morning shift at Rosa's Diner, where she served breakfast to construction workers and office employees who left tips that ranged from generous to insulting. Afternoon shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves and running the register during the slow hours when most people were still at work. She'd been picking up extra shifts wherever she could find them, trading sleep for dollars, but it was never quite enough. The math didn't work. Rent, utilities, food, Maya's school supplies. Something always came up short, and that something was usually rent. Maya had never complained. Not when they'd moved from the 1-bedroom to the studio. Not when Elena started buying the cheapest cereal instead of the kind Maya liked. Not when her shoes got too small and Elena had to wait 3 weeks before she could afford to replace them. Maya just adjusted, the way children do when they learn early that life is something you survive rather than enjoy. That night, after Maya was asleep on the pull-out couch they shared, Elena sat at the tiny table by the window and opened her laptop. The screen was cracked in one corner, held together with clear tape, but it still worked. She'd been searching for apartments for weeks, scrolling through listings that were either too expensive or located in neighborhoods where she wouldn't feel safe walking Maya to school. The email arrived at 11:30, buried between notifications about job applications and promotional offers she never opened. The subject line read, "Estate notification, Arturo Vicente Rodriguez." Elena almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something about the name stopped her. Arturo Vicente Rodriguez. Her grandfather's name. She opened it carefully, half expecting a phishing scam or a request for money. Instead, she found a formal letter from Whitmore & Associates, attorneys at law, based in Newark, New Jersey. "Dear Ms. Elena Maria Rodriguez, we are writing to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of Arturo Vicente Rodriguez, your paternal grandfather, who passed away 6 months ago at the age of 91. Mr. Rodriguez's estate has been settled, and per his explicit instructions, his property located in Gloucester County, New Jersey, is to be transferred to you upon completion of all legal requirements. The property consists of a former glass manufacturing facility on 8 acres of land. The structure sustained significant damage in a fire 17 years ago and has remained vacant since that time. There are no outstanding debts, liens, or encumbrances of any kind. The property is free and clear. Mr. Rodriguez also left a fund to cover your travel expenses should you wish to inspect the property before making any decisions regarding its future. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of the deed and discuss next steps." Elena read the letter 3 times before the words actually penetrated. Arturo Rodriguez. She'd met him exactly twice in her entire life. Once at her father's funeral when she was 9, a tall, quiet man who'd stood in the back of the church and left before anyone could speak to him. Once more at her mother's funeral when she was 19, pregnant with Maya and terrified about the future. He'd approached her then, pressed an envelope with $500 in her hand, and told her in Spanish that she was stronger than she knew. She'd never heard from him again. Didn't know where he lived, what he did, whether he was even still alive. Her father had rarely spoken about him, and when he did, it was with the careful distance of someone discussing a stranger rather than a parent. There had been some kind of falling out years before Elena was born, something her father had never explained and her mother had tactfully avoided mentioning. And now, apparently, he'd left her property, a burned-out glass factory in New Jersey. The letter included a check for $1,500, made out to Elena Rodriguez, marked travel expenses. She stared at it for a long time, turning it over in her hands as if it might disappear if she looked away. $1,500. More money than she'd had at one time in over a year. She pulled up a map on her laptop and searched for Gloucester County, New Jersey. It was about an hour south of Newark, mostly rural, scattered small towns connected by highways and state roads. She searched for the property address listed in the letter and found almost nothing. No photos, no recent sales data, just a pin on a map indicating a location outside of town called Mullica Hill. The practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her and Maya alive through 2 years of barely scraping by, started running calculations. Gas money to drive to New Jersey. Maybe 2 days off work, if she could convince her managers she had a family emergency. The check would cover it, with money left over for rent. But if the property was worthless, if it was just a burned-out shell on contaminated land, she'd have wasted time and money on a trip that led nowhere. She called the number on the letterhead the next morning during her break at the diner. A receptionist answered with professional warmth and transferred her to Thomas Whitmore, the attorney who'd sent the letter. His voice was measured and kind, with the careful patience of someone who'd delivered difficult news many times before. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for calling. I'm very sorry for your loss, though I understand you and your grandfather weren't particularly close. I barely knew him, Elena admitted, refilling salt shakers while she talked, the phone pressed between her shoulder and ear. Can you tell me about the property? The letter said it was damaged in a fire. That's correct. The glass factory ceased operations in 2007 following a significant structural fire. Your grandfather owned the property outright at that time and chose not to rebuild. The building has been vacant since then. I won't misrepresent the condition, Ms. Rodriguez. The structure is compromised. Most of the roof has collapsed. The windows are gone. It's not habitable in its current state. Elena's hope, which had been fragile to begin with, started to collapse like the roof he was describing. So it's worthless. Not worthless, Whitmore said carefully. The land itself has value. 8 acres in that area, zoned for industrial or commercial use. And your grandfather paid the property taxes through a trust that will continue to cover them for the next 50 years. You wouldn't have any ongoing expenses. Why would he leave it to me? We barely spoke. I didn't even know where he lived. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Your grandfather was a private man, Ms. Rodriguez, but he was very clear in his instructions. He specified that the property should go to you and your daughter, no one else. He left a letter as well, if you'd like me to read it to you. Elena glanced at the clock. Her break was almost over, and Rosa was already giving her pointed looks from behind the counter. Can you mail it to me? Of course. I'll send it today, along with the paperwork you'll need to sign. But Ms. Rodriguez, I'd encourage you to visit the property before making any decisions. Your grandfather was very specific that you should see it in person. She hung up feeling more confused than before. A burned-out factory on 8 acres of land she'd never seen, left by a grandfather she'd barely known. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. But the eviction notice was still taped to the inside of her kitchen cabinet, 30 days away from putting her and Maya on the street. And sometimes, Elena had learned, you took what life offered you, even when it didn't make sense. The letter from her grandfather arrived 3 days later in a thick envelope that also contained legal documents covered in dense paragraphs and signature lines marked with small red arrows. Elena waited until Maya was asleep before opening it, sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold while she worked up the courage. The handwriting was shaky but legible, written in careful English with occasional Spanish words woven through. Dear Elena, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have received notification about the factory. I imagine you are confused, perhaps angry that a stranger has left you a burden rather than a gift. I understand. We were strangers by my own choice, and I carry the weight of that choice even now. I knew your father, loved him, but we did not know how to speak to each other after your grandmother died. We were both proud, both stubborn, both certain the other should make the first move. We waited too long, and then he was gone. I saw you at his funeral, this small, serious girl with your mother's eyes, and I want to speak to you, to tell you things about your father that your mother might not know. But I didn't. I stayed silent, as I had learned to do. I saw you again at your mother's funeral, pregnant and alone, and I saw in you the same strength your grandmother had, the same quiet determination. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. So I gave you money and walked away, as I had always walked away. I am an old man now, and walking away has become my greatest regret. Not the business I lost, not the money that came and went, but the people I loved who I could not reach across the silence to touch. The factory is not what you think it is. It appears ruined, yes, destroyed by fire and time and neglect. But beneath the ruin, there is something I have protected for 40 years. Something I could not bring myself to sell or destroy, because it represented the best years of my life when your grandmother was alive and the work we did together meant something. Go to the factory. Go to the main floor, to the northwest corner where the old kilns stood. There's a floor panel marked with 3 small scratches in the shape of a star. Your grandmother made those marks when we first built the place, said they would guide us home if we ever got lost. Lift that panel. What you find beneath belongs to you and Maya now. Use it to build the life you deserve. Use it to give Maya what you never had. Use it to prove that sometimes, even when we fail the people we love while we're alive, we can still protect them after we're gone. I am sorry I was not the grandfather you deserved. I am sorry I waited too long to say the things that mattered. But I am not sorry for what I am leaving you. You earned it by surviving, by raising your daughter alone, by being the kind of person who gives without keeping score. Your grandmother would have loved you. She would have been proud. Canta tu mi amor, abuelo Arturo. Elena read the letter 4 times, her hands shaking harder with each pass. The words blurred together through tears she didn't try to stop. She'd spent so many years feeling invisible, feeling like her struggles didn't matter to anyone except Maya. And here was this man, this stranger who was also her grandfather, telling her he'd seen her. He'd noticed. He'd cared. But more than that, he was telling her there was something hidden in the factory, something he'd protected for 40 years, something beneath the floor. She wanted to believe it was real, that she wasn't about to waste precious time and money chasing a dying man's confused rambling. But the specificity of it, the northwest corner, the floor panel with 3 scratches like a star, those weren't the details of confusion. Those were the details of someone who'd spent a long time thinking about how to communicate something important. She called Whitmore the next morning before her shift started. The letter from my grandfather. He mentioned something about the factory, about the main floor. Is there any indication in his estate records of what he might have been referring to? Whitmore's response was measured. Your grandfather was very private about his business affairs, Ms. Rodriguez. But I can tell you that he was quite insistent that you visit the property in person. He made that request multiple times during our meetings. So you don't know what's there? I don't. But your grandfather was a meticulous man. If he said there's something you should see, I trust that assessment. Elena made her decision quickly, before doubt could talk her out of it. She requested 3 days off from both jobs, claiming a family emergency. Rosa grumbled, but approved it when Elena offered to work the late shift for a week to make up for it. The grocery store manager was less accommodating, suggesting that if family emergencies were going to be a regular occurrence, maybe she should look for more reliable employment. She swallowed the anger that comments sparked and thanked him for his understanding. She told Maya that night, over dinner, spaghetti with Jared sauce that had been on sale. We're going on a trip, baby. To New Jersey. Maya looked up from her plate, eyes bright with cautious excitement. Like a vacation? Sort of. My grandfather, the man who was your great-grandfather, He left us a building there. We're going to go see it. Is it a house? Are we going to live there? Elena chose her words carefully. It's not a house. It's an old factory where they used to make glass. It's probably not in very good shape, but we need to go look at it to see if there's anything valuable there. Like treasure. Maya's voice filled with the kind of hope only 7-year-olds can muster so easily. Maybe, but probably not the kind you're thinking of. More like land that we could sell, or equipment that's worth something. Adult treasure, not pirate treasure. Maya considered this seriously. But there could be something special, right? Something your grandfather wanted you to find. Maybe, sweetheart. We'll see. They left early on a Saturday morning. Before sunrise, Maya curled in the back seat with Cosmo clutched against her chest. Elena's car was a 2006 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on the odometer, a temperamental transmission, and a check engine light that had been on for so long she'd stopped noticing it. She'd bought it 3 years ago for $800 from a coworker's brother, and it had been worth every penny by continuing to run against all reasonable expectations. The drive took most of the day. Elena stopped twice for gas, once for food at a rest stop where Maya shared a meal with her mother despite Elena's insistence that she wasn't hungry. They crossed into New Jersey late in the afternoon, the landscape changing from highway sprawl to rural farmland, small towns appearing and disappearing like memories along the state roads. Mullica Hill was bigger than Elena had expected, but still small by any reasonable standard. Main Street featured a handful of shops, a diner that reminded her of Rosa's, a post office, and a library that looked like it had been built in the 1920s. They drove through town slowly, Maya pressing her face against the window and cataloging everything she saw. A hardware store, a pharmacy, a playground with swings and a slide. The factory was 3 miles outside town, accessed by a narrow road that turned from asphalt to gravel without warning. The GPS on Elena's phone lost signal twice before finally announcing they'd arrived at their destination. She pulled off the road onto a dirt path that might have once been a driveway and stopped, staring at what lay ahead. The glass factory was worse than she'd imagined. The main building was a long, low structure of brick and steel, its roof mostly collapsed inward, creating jagged silhouettes against the evening sky. Windows gaped like missing teeth. The walls were blackened with soot in patterns that suggested the fire had moved through with deliberate hunger. Smaller outbuildings surrounded the main structure, some intact, others reduced to skeletal frameworks of rusted metal. 8 acres of land stretched beyond the buildings, overgrown with weeds and wild grasses that had reclaimed the space where trucks had once loaded and unloaded materials. In the distance, a line of trees marked the property boundary, their branches dark against the fading light. It looked abandoned. It looked dangerous. It looked exactly like the kind of place you'd tell your child to stay away from. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between the front seats. Is this it? Yeah, baby. This is it. It's scary. It is a little scary, Elaine admitted. But it's ours. Your great-grandfather built this place with your great-grandmother. They made beautiful things here. What kind of things? Elena thought about the letter, about her grandfather's mention of the best years of his life. Glass. All different kinds. Windows and bottles and art pieces. Things that let light through. They sat in the car for a long time, neither of them moving. The sun was setting properly now, painting the ruins in shades of orange and purple that made the destruction look almost beautiful. Elena knew they should find somewhere to stay for the night, a motel or a room they could afford. But something pulled at her, the same thing that had made her drive 12 hours with a 7-year-old in a car that might break down at any moment. Her grandfather's letter had said to go to the northwest corner, to find a floor panel marked with 3 small scratches like star. Mom, are we going inside? Elena looked at the factory, at the collapsed roof and the blackened walls, and at the dangerous shadows gathering in the empty windows. Then she looked at the eviction notice she'd folded and tucked in her purse. 30 days that had become 27 while they drove. Not tonight, she said finally. Tonight we find a place to sleep. Tomorrow we'll come back in the daylight and see what we can see. They found a motel 6 miles back toward town, a small place called the Pine Rest, and that had seen better decades, but was clean and cheap. Elena paid for one night with cash from the travel money, accepted 2 keys attached to a plastic tag marked with the number 7, and carried their overnight bags up the exterior stairs to a room that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. Maya claimed the bed nearest the window and spread out her drawings while Elena ordered pizza from a place that delivered. They ate sitting cross-legged on the bed, watching a nature documentary about whales on the small television. Maya narrating facts she'd learned from library books, while Elena tried to quiet the anxious calculations running through her mind. The factory was worthless as a building. Nobody would buy it. Nobody could use it. Even the land might be contaminated from industrial use, might require environmental cleanup that would cost more than it was worth. She'd driven 12 hours to look at a ruin, but the letter had been so specific. The northwest corner, a floor panel, 3 scratches like a star. What if there really was something there? What if her grandfather, this man she'd barely known, had actually left her something valuable? And even if he hadn't, even if there was nothing beneath that floor except concrete and disappointment, at least she would know. At least she could stop wondering what might have been and focus on what actually was. Maya fell asleep first. As always, her small body curled around Cosmo, her breathing soft and steady. Elena lay awake in the other bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her grandfather, about the things he'd written in his letter, about regret and silence, and the distance that grows between people when pride becomes more important than connection. She thought about her own father, who died when she was 9, cancer that had moved too fast for treatment to matter. She remembered him as someone who smiled easily but talked rarely about anything that mattered. He'd worked construction, coming home covered in dust and exhaustion, but he'd always made time to help her with homework, to read to her before bed, to tell her she could be anything she wanted if she worked hard enough. She believed him then, believed that hard work was enough, that determination could overcome circumstance, that the world was fundamentally fair. She didn't believe that anymore. She'd worked harder than anyone she knew, and it had gotten her an eviction notice and a 7-year-old who'd learned to share her food without being asked because she understood, in the way children do, that sometimes there wasn't enough. But maybe, just maybe, her grandfather had left her something that would change that. Something that would prove hard work actually could lead somewhere besides exhaustion. She fell asleep still thinking about floor panels and stars, about the best years of someone's life preserved beneath the wreckage of what came after. The factory looked even worse in morning light. What had seemed romantically ruined in the sunset now revealed itself as genuinely dangerous. The collapsed portions of the roof had left exposed steel beams twisted like broken bones. Glass from the shattered windows littered the ground in glittering fragments that caught the early sun. Graffiti covered the lower sections of the walls, tags and names and crude drawings left by teenagers who'd broken in over the years. Elena parked in the same place they'd stopped the night before and took a long moment to assess the situation. She'd brought a flashlight from the motel, borrowed from the front desk with a promise to return it. She'd also bought work gloves at a gas station on the way over, cheap cloth ones that wouldn't protect against much, but were better than nothing. Maya pressed against the car window, studying the building with the serious concentration she brought to everything. It's really broken. It is. That's why you're going to stay in the car while I go inside. I need you to keep the doors locked and the windows up, okay? If anything feels wrong, if you see anyone coming, you honk the horn 3 times and I'll come right out. I could help you look. I know you could, baby, but it's not safe in there. Too much broken glass. Too many places where the floor might not hold. I need to know you're safe out here, so I can focus on looking, okay? Maya clearly didn't like it, but she nodded. Okay, but if you find treasure, you have to tell me right away. Deal. Elena approached the main building carefully, watching where she stepped. The large bay doors that had once allowed trucks to enter were long gone, leaving an opening wide enough to drive through. She stood at the threshold for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. The main floor was a disaster of collapsed ceiling sections, twisted metal, and debris that had accumulated over 17 years of abandonment. But beneath the destruction, she could see the bones of what the factory had been. The floor was concrete, stained and cracked, but mostly intact. Support columns ran in rows, some still straight, others leaning at angles that suggested they might fall at any moment. Along the walls, the remnants of workstations and equipment remained, rusted into abstract sculptures of their former function. She oriented herself carefully. The building ran roughly east to west. She'd entered on the south side. That meant the northwest corner was to her right and ahead, the farthest point from where she stood. She started walking, stepping over debris, avoiding pools of standing water that had collected in low spots on the floor. The silence inside was complete except for the sound of her footsteps and the occasional crack and groan of metal settling. Birds had nested in the exposed rafters, and she could hear their movement overhead, a flutter of wings and small scratching sounds that made her heart race before she identified them. The northwest corner was partially buried under a section of collapsed roof. Steel beams had fallen in a crisscross pattern, creating a kind of metal cage over the area she needed to search. Elena stood at the edge of it, trying to see if there was a safe way through. The beams appeared stable, settled into their current position years ago, and unlikely to shift unless she disturbed them significantly. But unlikely wasn't the same as impossible, and she was acutely aware that Maya was sitting in the car outside, trusting her mother to come back. She tested the first beam carefully, pushing against it with her gloved hands. It didn't move. She tried the next one, then the next, finding a path that seemed viable. She called out to Maya through the open bay doors. "I'm okay, baby. Still looking." "Okay." Maya's voice came back, small and distant. Elena squeezed through the gap between two beams, her jacket catching on a sharp edge and tearing with a sound that made her wince. The space on the other side was clearer, protected by the fallen metal from the worst of the ceiling collapse. She pulled out the flashlight and swept it across the floor, looking for markings. The concrete was dirty, covered in a layer of soot and dust that had settled over everything. She knelt down and started wiping sections clean with her gloved hand, working in a grid pattern, try to be systematic. It took 20 minutes before she found them. 3 small scratches in the concrete, arranged in a rough triangle that could generously be called star-shaped. They were shallow, barely visible even when the surface was clean, but they were deliberate. Someone had made those marks with intention. Elena's heart started beating faster. This was real. Her grandfather hadn't been confused or rambling. He'd known exactly where this was, had remembered it for decades, had preserved it in his letter so she could find it. She examined the floor around the marks carefully. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just concrete, solid and unbroken. But as she angled the flashlight differently, she noticed a very faint seam, a line so thin it was almost invisible, running in a rough rectangle about 3 feet by 4 feet. She pressed on different sections of the rectangle, looking for any sign that this was a panel rather than a solid floor. Nothing happened. She tried running her fingers along the seams, looking for a place to get leverage. Still nothing. Then she noticed something else. One of the scratches, the point at the top of the star, was slightly deeper than the others. And when she looked more closely, she could see that it continued, a thin line extending from the scratch toward the seam. She followed the line with her finger and found a small indentation, no bigger than a dime, positioned right at the edge of the rectangular seam. She pressed it firmly. A soft click echoed in the quiet space. The section of floor shifted, rising slightly from the edges as if on some kind of hydraulic mechanism. Elena grabbed the edge and lifted, her muscles straining, the concrete panel far heavier than she'd expected. It came up slowly, hinged on one side, revealing a dark space beneath the factory floor. The smell that emerged was cool and dry, like a basement or cellar, but without the mustiness of decay. Her grandfather had sealed this well, protected it from moisture and time. She pointed the flashlight down into the darkness. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The space beneath the floor was a vault. Not a commercial vault with steel walls and combination locks, but a carefully constructed concrete room, roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, with a ceiling height of about 7 feet. The walls were smooth and painted white, and the space was filled with wooden crates stacked carefully against the walls. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. In the center of the vault, arranged on a purpose-built wooden table, were glass objects. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, each one positioned with care and lit by the ambient light filtering through the open floor panel. Vases and sculptures and bowls, all of them in colors Elena had never seen before. Deep blues that seemed to hold the ocean inside them. Reds that glowed like they were lit from within. Greens and purples and golds that shifted in the light, changing hue as her flashlight beam moved across them. They were beautiful. They were extraordinary. They were the kind of things you'd see in a museum behind protective glass with placards explaining their importance. And they were sitting here in a vault beneath a burned-out factory in New Jersey, waiting for her to find them. Elena stood frozen at the edge of the opening, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. People who worked double shifts and lived in studio apartments and got eviction notices didn't find vaults full of priceless art. But it was here, real and solid and waiting. She looked back toward the bay doors, toward where Maya sat in the car, and made a decision. This was safe enough to show her daughter. This was something Maya needed to see. She ran back through the building, squeezing through the gap in the fallen beams, her mind racing ahead of her body. She burst out into the sunlight and ran to the car, yanking open the door. Maya jumped at the sudden movement, her eyes going wide. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's right. I found it. I found what your great-grandfather left us." "Treasure?" Elena laughed, the sound surprising her with its brightness. "Yeah, sweetheart. Treasure." She helped Maya out of the car, took her hand firmly, and led her into the factory. She guided her daughter carefully through the debris, pointing out each obstacle, making sure Maya's feet found safe purchase. When they reached the gap in the fallen beams, she lifted Maya and carried her through, refusing to let anything sharp or unstable touch her child. At the edge of the open vault, she set Maya down gently and pointed the flashlight beam across the glass objects. Maya gasped, a small sound of pure wonder. "Mom, they're so pretty." "They are. Your great-grandfather and great-grandmother made these. They spent years creating them. Are they worth a lot of money?" "I don't know yet, baby, but I think they might be." They stood together at the edge of the vault, mother and daughter, looking down at the legacy of people they'd never really known. And Elena felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been tight and compressed for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. This was hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind she'd been rationing like food stamps, but something solid enough to build on. Her grandfather had seen her struggling. He'd watched her from a distance and decided she deserved better. He'd protected something precious for decades and saved it for someone he believed would use it right. And somehow, impossibly, he'd chosen her. Elena squeezed Maya's hand. "We need to be really careful here, okay? We can't touch anything yet. We need to find out what all this is worth, get people who know about art and glass to help us. But this is ours, baby. Your great-grandfather left it for us. Can we keep some of it?" The pretty blue vase. Elena looked at the piece Maya was pointing to, a cobalt blue vase with gold leaf patterns that seemed to float inside the glass like trapped fire. It was stunning. It probably belonged in a museum. But Maya had never asked for anything, had never complained when Elena bought the cheap cereal or the secondhand shoes. She'd survived 2 years of poverty with grace and resilience that made Elena's heart hurt. "Yes, sweetheart, we can keep that one." They climbed down into the vault using a ladder Elena found propped against the wall, its rungs worn smooth by decades of use. The space felt different from inside, more like a sanctuary than a storage room. The walls were covered with photographs that Elena hadn't been able to see from above, images of the factory in its working days, of her grandfather and grandmother standing together among the glass furnaces, of pieces being created and finished and displayed. There was a journal on the wooden table, leather-bound and thick with pages. Elena opened it carefully and found her grandfather's handwriting, this time in Spanish, documenting every piece in the vault. Dates of creation, materials used, inspiration, estimated value based on sales of similar pieces. She turned pages slowly, her hands shaking as the numbers accumulated. $50,000 for one vase, $80,000 for a sculpture, $120,000 for a set of bowls that had been commissioned by a museum that had gone bankrupt before taking delivery. The final page showed a total, calculated 6 months before her grandfather's death, with a note in the margin. Conservative estimate based on current market conditions and assuming private sales through established galleries. Total collection value, $395 million. $395 million. Elena sat down hard on the concrete floor, the journal falling from her hands. Maya picked it up and looked at the number, her young mind not quite grasping what it meant, but understanding from her mother's reaction that it was important. "Is that good, Mom?" Elena pulled Maya into her lap and held her tight, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, baby, that's really good." They sat together in the vault beneath the ruined factory, surrounded by 40 years of work and love and artistry that had been waiting patiently for them to arrive. And Elena let herself cry, these strange, complicated tears of relief and grief and gratitude that something beautiful had survived the fire, that her grandfather had protected it, that she and Maya would never have to worry about eviction notices again. The glass caught the light from above and threw patterns across the white walls, colors dancing and shifting as Elena's tears fell onto Maya's hair. They'd driven 12 hours to find this. They'd come with almost nothing, expecting less. And they'd found something worth more than Elena could have imagined, even in her most desperate moments of hoping for rescue. Outside, the factory still stood ruined and broken against the New Jersey sky. But beneath it, in a space carved out of concrete and time, her grandfather's gift waited to transform their lives. Tomorrow she'd call the attorney. Tomorrow she'd figure out authentication and appraisals and 1,000 complicated steps between discovery and security. Tomorrow she'd start building the future her grandfather had believed she deserved. But today, she sat with her daughter in a vault full of glass and light, and let herself feel what she hadn't felt in years. The call to Thomas Whitmore came at 9 o'clock the next morning, after Elena had spent a sleepless night alternating between euphoria and terror. She'd barely slept, her mind racing through scenarios that ranged from triumphant to catastrophic. What if the glass wasn't real? What if her grandfather had been deluded about its value? What if she'd misread the journal, mistranslated the Spanish, added zeros where they didn't belong? Maya had slept soundly beside her, one arm wrapped around Cosmo, completely unaware that their entire world had shifted on its axis. Elena had watched her daughter sleep and tried to imagine what their lives might look like in 6 months, a year, 5 years. A real apartment with separate bedrooms, college savings, health insurance that actually covered doctor's visits, the possibility of rest. Whitmore answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone who'd been awake for hours already. "Ms. Rodriguez, I was hoping to hear from you. How did you find the property?" "I found the vault." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Beneath the main floor. My grandfather's letter led me right to it." There was a pause, longer than comfortable. When Whitmore spoke again, something in his tone had shifted. "You found it. And what was inside?" "Glass. Hundreds of pieces, maybe thousands. Art glass, sculpture, vases, bowls. There's a journal documenting everything. My grandfather estimated the collection at $395 million. The silence stretched longer this time. Elena could hear papers shuffling in the background, the faint sound of typing. "Mr. Whitmore? I'm here. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be very clear with you. Your grandfather never discussed the specifics of what might be at the property. He only insisted that you visited in person and that ownership transfer to you immediately upon his death. I had no knowledge of a collection of this magnitude." Something cold settled in Elena's stomach. "But you knew there was something there. I knew he wanted you to have the property. That's all I knew with certainty." Whitmore's voice remained professional, but Elena could hear the tension underneath. "Ms. Rodriguez, a collection of that value requires immediate expert authentication and security. You cannot leave it unguarded in an abandoned factory. You need to contact specialized appraisers, probably several, and you need to arrange for transport to a secure facility. I don't know how to do any of that. I don't know anyone who does. I can provide referrals. I have colleagues in Philadelphia who specialize in high-value estates and can recommend authentication experts. But Elena, and I'm going to be very frank with you now, a discovery of this magnitude will attract attention. Some of that attention will be welcome and legitimate. Some of it won't be. The coldness in Elena's stomach spread outward. What do you mean? I mean that people will want to verify that this collection is real. They'll want to verify that your grandfather had legitimate ownership of every piece. They'll want to question the valuation, the provenance, the authenticity of the materials. And some people, when they learn that a single mother with no art background has inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, will question whether you're capable of managing it appropriately. The words hit like a physical blow. You mean my family? I mean anyone who might benefit from suggesting you need help. Family, yes, but also opportunists, lawyers looking for contingency cases, distant relatives you've never met claiming they were promised something. This kind of wealth changes how people see you, Ms. Rodriguez. Not everyone will be happy for your good fortune. Elena thought about her sister, Rebecca, who'd borrowed $12,000 3 years ago for a business opportunity and had stopped answering Elena's calls shortly after. She thought about her brother Marcus, who'd taken $2,000 from their mother's life insurance money with promises to pay it back and had instead moved to Florida without leaving a forwarding address. She thought about her Aunt Carmen, who'd told Elena at her mother's funeral that single motherhood was a choice and that she shouldn't expect family to bail her out of consequences. They'd all disappeared when she needed them. They'd all made it clear that her struggles were her own problem. And now, if word got out about the inheritance, they'd come back, not to celebrate her, but to claim their share of something they'd never helped her build. What should I do? Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. First, don't tell anyone else about this until we have proper authentication and security in place. Not family, not friends, not coworkers. The fewer people who know, the better. Second, I'm going to contact my colleagues in Philadelphia today. I'll have recommendations for you by this evening. Third, you need to stay at the property or arrange for security. If someone breaks in and damages or steals any of those pieces, you could lose millions before you've even confirmed what you have. Elena looked at Maya, who was eating cereal from a paper bowl Elena had picked up at a gas station, her drawings spread across the motel bed. I have my daughter with me. I can't stay at the factory. It's not safe. Then we arrange professional security immediately. I have contacts who handle estate protection. It's expensive but necessary. The alternative is risking everything your grandfather spent 40 years protecting. They talked for another 20 minutes. Whitmore taking notes, Elena trying to absorb information that felt increasingly overwhelming. Authentication would take weeks, possibly months. Multiple experts would need to examine the pieces, verify materials and techniques, establish provenance through documentation and comparison to known works. The journal would help, but it wasn't enough on its own. And during all of that, Elena would need to keep working, keep paying rent on an apartment she was being evicted from, keep Maya fed and clothed and in school, all while protecting a collection worth more than she could comprehend. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She looked at Maya and tried to smile. "How's the cereal, baby?" "It's okay. The milk tastes weird. It's ultra-pasteurized. Lasts longer but tastes different." Elena sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Maya close. "Listen, we're going to have to stay here a few more days while I work some things out. Is that okay with you?" Maya nodded seriously. "Because of the glass treasure?" "Yeah, because of that. I need to make sure it's real and that it's safe. But that means you might miss a few days of school." "That's okay. I can read my library books and do math problems." Mrs. Patterson gave me extra worksheets before we left. Of course she did. Maya's teacher had been one of the few people who'd understood their situation, who'd quietly made sure Maya had school supplies and winter coat from the lost and found that were unclaimed, but somehow exactly Maya's size. Elena called Rosa's Diner and the grocery store, explaining that the family emergency was more complicated than expected, that she needed the rest of the week. Rosa was sympathetic. The grocery store manager was not, suggesting again that maybe Elena's reliability wasn't up to their standards. She hung up before she said something that would get her fired outright. Security arrived that afternoon in the form of 2 men in a white van marked Jefferson County Property Protection Services. They'd been dispatched by Whitmore, who'd called in favors and expedited what normally would have taken days to arrange. The men were professional and discreet, asking only enough questions to understand what they were protecting and where. They installed motion sensors around the perimeter of the main building, positioned cameras to cover all entrances, and set up a monitoring station in one of the intact outbuildings. One of them would be on site 24 hours a day until Elena made other arrangements. The cost was $300 per day. Elena signed a contract with money she didn't have, trusting that somehow this would work out before the bills came due. That night, she received an email from Whitmore with a list of 5 appraisers, all of them specialists in art glass from the late 20th century. Their credentials were intimidating. Degrees from prestigious universities, decades of experience, publications in academic journals, testimonials from museums and private collectors. The first one she called, Dr. Patricia Chun from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, listened to Elena's explanation with polite skepticism that became sharp interest when Elena mentioned her grandfather's name. Arturo Rodriguez, the glassmaker who ran that factory in Mullica Hill. I thought all his work had been destroyed in the fire. Most of it was, but he'd been storing his best pieces in a vault beneath the factory floor. He left it to me. And you say there are hundreds of pieces? The journal lists 437 individual items, ranging from small vessels to large sculptures. Dr. Chin's silence lasted long enough that Elena thought the call had dropped. Ms. Rodriguez, if even a fraction of those pieces are authentic Rodriguez work, you're looking at one of the most significant art glass collections in private hands. Your grandfather was producing work that rivaled Dale Chihuly and Lino Tagliapietra. He was considered one of the finest glass blowers of his generation before he disappeared from the art world. He didn't disappear. He had a fire. He lost everything. No, Ms. Rodriguez. He withdrew from the public sphere at least 5 years before the fire. Stopped showing at galleries, stopped taking commissions, stopped attending conferences. No one knew why. The assumption was that he'd retired or moved on to other pursuits. The fire simply confirmed that his productive period was over. Elena thought about the journal, about the dates on the entries. The most recent pieces had been created in 2006, a year before the fire. But her grandfather had still been working in the vault up until then, still creating, still documenting. He hadn't stopped because he'd lost interest. He'd stopped because he'd been preparing to pass everything on. Can you come evaluate the collection? Elena asked. I need to know what I have, what it's worth, how to protect it. I can come this week. But Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be clear with you. An authentication of this scope will require multiple experts. I can verify technique and materials, compare to known Rodriguez works, establish rough valuations. But for a collection of this magnitude, you'll need additional appraisers, possibly scientific testing of the glass composition, extensive documentation of provenance. How long will that take? Months, possibly a year or more for complete authentication. And how much will it cost? Dr. Chin's answer made Elena's stomach drop. For my services alone, approximately $30,000. That's assuming the collection is as extensive as you've described. Other experts will charge similar rates. You're looking at 6 figures in authentication costs before you can even begin to sell or insure the collection. 6 figures. Elena had $300 in her checking account and an eviction notice that now felt like a cruel joke. She was sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in glass that she couldn't touch, couldn't sell, couldn't do anything with until she spent money she didn't have to prove it was real. I understand this is overwhelming, Dr. Chin said, her voice gentler. But there are options. Some auction houses will front authentication costs in exchange for exclusive rights to sell the collection. Museums might be interested in funding the process if you're willing to donate pieces. There are paths forward, Ms. Rodriguez. You just need to be very careful about which one you choose. They scheduled an appointment for Thursday, 2 days away. Elena hung up and sat in the motel room with her head in her hands while Maya practiced writing the alphabet in her notebook, each letter carefully formed, each line straight and true. The next morning brought a visitor Elena hadn't expected. She was sitting in the car outside the factory, watching the security guard make his rounds, when a silver BMW pulled up the gravel drive and parked 20 feet away. The woman who emerged was in her early 40s, dressed in clothes that cost more than Elena made in a month, her hair styled in a way that suggested professional maintenance. Elena recognized her immediately. Rebecca, her older sister, the one who'd borrowed $12,000 and disappeared. Rebecca approached the car with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elena rolled down the window, but didn't get out. Elena, I've been trying to reach you. Your phone's been going straight to voicemail. I've been busy. I heard you inherited property from grandfather Arturo. I wanted to come see it, make sure you were okay. Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How did you hear about that? Marcus called me. He heard from Aunt Carmen, who apparently got a call from the attorney's office confirming details for the estate transfer. Rebecca's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Why didn't you tell us? We're family. We should be supporting each other through this. The way you supported me when I was living in my car. Rebecca's smile finally faltered. That was different. You know I was going through a rough patch with the business. I couldn't just. You borrowed $12,000 with a promise to pay it back in 6 months. That was 3 years ago. I called you 17 times. You blocked my number. Elena, I know you're angry, but this isn't the time for petty grudges. You've inherited a significant property, and you're going to need help managing it. You can't do this alone. You don't have the experience or the connections or, frankly, the education to handle something this complex. The words were so similar to what Whitmore had warned about that Elena almost laughed. I'm handling it fine. Are you? Because from what I understand, you're paying for private security at an abandoned factory. That doesn't sound like someone who has a plan. Rebecca leaned against the car, her posture casual but her eyes sharp. Look, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to help. I have a business background. I have contacts in real estate and property development. We could develop this land together, split the proceeds fairly among family. The factory was left to me and Maya, specifically, not to the family. But that's not really fair, is it? Grandfather hardly knew you. He knew all of us equally little. The fact that he put your name on the deed was probably just convenience. He would have wanted all his grandchildren to benefit. Maya stirred in the back seat, waking from a nap she'd been taking. Elena saw Rebecca's gaze shift to her daughter, calculation visible in the way her expression softened into something meant to look like concern. And think about Maya. Think about what's best for her. Wouldn't it be better to have family involved? People who can guide you through this process? People who can make sure you don't get taken advantage of by lawyers and consultants who just want to drain your resources. Like you tried to drain my resources 3 years ago. Rebecca straightened, the false warmth draining from her face. Fine. You want to be stubborn about this. That's your choice. But when you realize you're in over your head, when the bills pile up and the legal complications start mounting, don't come crying to me for help. She started to turn away, then stopped. Actually, you should know. Marcus and I have been talking to a lawyer. We think there's a case for challenging grandfather's estate distribution. He was 91 when he died, possibly not a sound mind. The fact that he left everything to you and nothing to his other grandchildren suggests undue influence or diminished capacity. He was completely sound. The attorney has documentation. Documentation can be questioned. Wills can be contested, especially when the beneficiary is someone with a history of financial instability who might have manipulated an elderly relative. The accusation hung in the air between them. Elena felt rage building in her chest, hot and clean. I met him twice in my entire life. I didn't even know he was still alive until I got the letter from the attorney. That's your story. But it's going to be very interesting to see what a court thinks when they learn about a mysterious vault full of valuables that conveniently appeared right after you inherited the property. When they start asking how much you actually knew about what was here, how many conversations you had with grandfather that you're not disclosing. Rebecca smiled again, and this time it was genuine. She was enjoying this. I'll be in touch, Elena. Think about my offer. It would be so much easier for everyone if we could work this out as family. She walked back to her BMW and drove away, leaving Elena sitting in the car with her heart pounding and Maya's small voice asking from the back seat. Mom, who was that lady? Someone who doesn't matter anymore, baby. But that was a lie. Rebecca mattered because she just threatened everything. A legal challenge could tie up the estate for years. It could freeze the collection, prevent Elena from selling anything, drain whatever resources she managed to scrape together in legal fees, defending something that was rightfully hers. And the accusation of undue influence, the suggestion that Elena had somehow manipulated her grandfather, that was poison that would spread if Rebecca decided to push it publicly. People would believe it because they wanted to believe it, because they couldn't accept that someone like Elena, someone struggling and poor and uneducated, could simply be given something valuable without having done something wrong to get it. She called Whitmore immediately, explaining what had happened. His response was grim. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Ms. Rodriguez, you need to understand that your sister doesn't have a strong legal case. Your grandfather's will was properly executed. He was demonstrably of sound mind, and his attorney can testify to his intentions. But that doesn't mean she can't make your life hell trying to prove otherwise. What do? You prepare for a fight. You document everything. You make sure every step you take with this collection is beyond reproach. And you do not, under any circumstances, give them ammunition by making mistakes." That afternoon, Elena drove back to the factory with Maya and descended into the vault once more. This time, she brought her phone and photographed everything. Every piece of glass, every page of the journal, every photograph on the walls. She documented the condition of the vault, the security measures, the careful organization that her grandfather had maintained for decades. Maya helped, holding the flashlight steady while Elena worked, asking questions about the different pieces, about what they were made of and how they'd been created. Elena answered as best she could, drawing on memories of things she'd read in the journal, of techniques her grandfather had documented in his careful Spanish. "Mom, what's this one?" Maya pointed to a sculpture that seemed to be made of layers of different colored glass, each layer visible through the ones above it like geological strata. "That's called a Graal piece. Your great-grandfather would make a colored glass vessel, then cover it with clear glass, then engrave through the clear layer to reveal the color underneath. Then he'd heat it again and add another layer. That sounds really hard. It was. That's why his work was so valuable. He could do things other glassblowers couldn't." Maya was quiet for a moment, her small hand resting on Elena's arm. "Are we going to sell them?" "Some of them, yeah. We have to. What about the blue vase?" "The one I liked." Elena looked at the piece Maya had claimed, the cobalt blue with gold leaf that seemed to glow from within. According to the journal, it had been created in 1994, a commission piece that had never been delivered because the client had died before taking possession. Her grandfather had valued it at $180,000. "We're keeping that one. I promised you we could. But it's worth a lot of money, right? Maybe we should sell it so we could buy food and pay rent." Elena pulled Maya into a tight hug, this 7-year-old who understood poverty so well she was willing to give up the one thing she'd been promised. "No, baby. We're keeping it. Your great-grandfather made it, and you love it, and that makes it worth more than money." They stayed in the vault for another hour, Elena photographing and Maya exploring, until the security guard called down that Dr. Chun had arrived a day early, explaining that her schedule had opened up and she'd driven down from Philadelphia immediately upon hearing the name Rodriguez. Elena climbed out of the vault to find a woman in her 60s waiting by the ladder, her eyes bright with professional excitement barely contained beneath academic composure. Dr. Chun was smaller than Elena had imagined from their phone conversation, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades being the smartest person in any room. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for allowing me to come on short notice. When I realized you were talking about Arturo Rodriguez's private collection, I had to clear my schedule. Do you understand how significant this is?" The attorney said it was valuable. Valuable doesn't begin to cover it. Your grandfather was producing museum-quality work for 40 years. He showed at the best galleries in the world until he withdrew from public life. Collectors would have paid anything for his pieces, but he stopped selling. Just vanished. Dr. Chen's gaze moved past Elena toward the open vault. "May I?" Elena guided her down the ladder, watching as the appraiser's professional composure cracked the moment she saw the collection. Dr. Chun stood frozen at the bottom of the ladder, her hand over her mouth, her eyes moving from piece to piece with an expression that looked almost like grief. Oh my God, the Oceanic series. I thought these were destroyed. She moved toward a group of vessels in shades of blue and green, each one seeming to contain moving water inside the glass. These were shown at the Corning Museum in 1989. There was a fire at the transport company, and they were reported lost. But they weren't lost. He kept them. Why would he do that? Elena asked. If people wanted to buy them, why not sell? Dr. Chun turned to look at her, and there were actual tears in the woman's eyes. Because they were perfect. Because once you create something perfect, letting it go becomes impossible. Your grandfather was an artist, Ms. Rodriguez. These pieces weren't products to him. They were expressions of something he could never quite articulate in words. She spent 3 hours in the vault, examining pieces with a jeweler's loupe, taking notes in a leather journal, occasionally making small sounds of discovery or disbelief. Maya sat quietly on the bottom step of the ladder, drawing in her notebook, while Elena watched and tried to understand what she was actually seeing. When Dr. Chun finally emerged, she looked exhausted but exhilarated. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to be very direct with you. This collection is extraordinary. I've examined approximately 40 pieces in detail, and every single one is authentic Rodriguez work at the highest level of his craft. The techniques are flawless, the materials are premium, and the artistic vision is consistent with his known style, but shows evolution over time. How much is it worth? I can't give you a complete appraisal without examining every piece and conducting some scientific testing. But based on what I've seen, and assuming the rest of the collection is of similar quality, your grandfather's estimate of $395 million is conservative. At auction, with proper marketing and authentication, you could be looking at significantly more. The number hit Elena like a physical force. She'd read it in the journal, but hearing it confirmed by an expert made it real in a way that terrified her. How significantly more? $450 million. Possibly $500 million if the market conditions are favorable and we can generate competitive bidding. Elena sat down on the concrete floor of the factory, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Dr. Chin sat beside her, professional distance abandoned in favor of human kindness. I know this is overwhelming, but Ms. Rodriguez, you need to understand what you have here. This isn't just wealth. It's cultural heritage. These pieces belong in museums where people can see them, study them, be inspired by them. Your grandfather created something that transcends monetary value. I need the money. Elena's voice came out flat. My daughter and I are being evicted from our apartment. I work 2 jobs, and it's not enough. I can't afford to think about cultural heritage when I don't know where we're going to sleep next month. I understand, and I'm not suggesting you donate everything, but perhaps a middle path? Sell the majority of the collection to secure your financial future, but donate select pieces to museums in your grandfather's name. That way you honor his legacy while also taking care of your family. It was reasonable. It was what her grandfather probably would have wanted. But Elena thought about Rebecca's threat, about Marcus, who she hadn't heard from in 3 years, who would undoubtedly appear now, about Aunt Carmen, who told her she deserved her poverty because of her choices. None of them had cared about legacy when she was sleeping in her car. None of them had worried about cultural heritage when she was feeding Maya generic cereal because it was 20 cents cheaper. I'll think about it, Elena said. Dr. Chun gave her a card with contact information for additional appraisers, for auction houses that specialized in art glass, for insurance companies that could provide coverage for high-value collections. She explained the next steps: comprehensive authentication, scientific testing of glass composition, provenance research, legal verification of ownership, insurance, security, eventually auction or private sale. Each step cost money. Each step took time. And during all of it, Elena would need to live, to feed Maya, to pay for the motel room and the security guards and the authentication experts. There are advanced services, Dr. Chun explained as if reading her mind. Companies that will loan you money against the appraised value of the collection. The interest rates are high, but it would give you working capital while authentication proceeds. How high? 20 to 30%. Elena did the math quickly. Even at 30% interest, a loan against a fraction of the collection's value would be more money than she'd earn in 10 years of double shifts. It would be enough to survive while the process played out. But it would also be debt, and debt had sharp teeth. She'd learned that the hard way. That night, back at the motel, Elena opened her laptop and started researching everything Dr. Chen had mentioned. Auction houses, appraisers, insurance companies, advanced loan services. She read reviews, compared rates, tried to understand an industry she'd never had reason to know existed. Maya fell asleep early, exhausted from the day. Elena tucked her in carefully and returned to her research, following threads from one website to another, taking notes in a composition notebook she'd bought at a gas station. At 11:30, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Elena Rodriguez? The voice was male, professional, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Who is this? My name is David Kensington. I'm a private collector based in London. I heard through certain channels that you've come into possession of Arturo Rodriguez's private collection. I wanted to reach out personally to express my interest in purchasing the entire collection as a single lot. Elena's exhaustion vanished, replaced by sharp alertness. How did you get this number? I have associates who keep me informed about significant discoveries in the art world. Your grandfather's work is legendary among serious collectors. The fact that his private collection has surfaced is news that travels quickly in our circles. I haven't told anyone outside a small group of professionals. Someone always talks, Ms. Rodriguez. A security guard mentions an unusual assignment. An appraiser gets excited and confides in a colleague. Information finds its way to people who are listening for it. The coldness Elena had felt when Rebecca appeared came back, sharper this time. I'm not interested in selling to a private collector. You haven't heard my offer yet. I'm prepared to pay $400 million for the complete collection. Cash, transferred to any account you specify, within 72 hours of authentication. No auction fees, no public scrutiny, no legal complications. Just a straightforward transaction between two parties. For $100 million. Life-changing wealth, available immediately. Why would you offer that without even seeing the collection? Because I've been trying to acquire Rodriguez's work for 20 years. I own 3 of his public pieces, purchased at considerable expense. The opportunity to own his private collection, the pieces he chose to keep for himself, is worth any price. I need to think about it. Of course. But Ms. Rodriguez, I should warn you that auction is a lengthy process. Authentication takes months. Marketing takes more months. The auction itself requires the right timing, the right venue, the right buyers in attendance. And during all of that, you'll be paying experts in security and insurance and living expenses. My offer eliminates all of that. It gives you certainty immediately. I said I need to think about it. I understand. I'll call you again in a few days. But please consider carefully. Opportunities like this don't come around often. For either of us. He hung up before Elena could respond. She sat holding the phone, her mind racing. For $100 million. Immediate. No waiting, no risk, no chance for Rebecca to file legal challenges or for something to go wrong during the authentication process. But also no competition, no verification that the price was fair, no expert guidance on whether she was being taken advantage of. She called Whitmore immediately, not caring that it was almost midnight. He answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the hour. Ms. Rodriguez, what's wrong? She explained the call from Kensington. Whitmore's response was immediate and sharp. Do not engage with him further. Do not accept any offers. Do not provide any information about the collection. He's offering $400 million. He's offering what sounds like a lot of money to someone who has no frame of reference for what the collection is actually worth. Ms. Rodriguez, if a private collector is making unsolicited offers before you've even completed authentication, that tells me the collection is worth significantly more than he's offering. Dr. Chun said it could be worth up to $500 million at auction, and she's probably being conservative. But more importantly, accepting an offer like this from a caller you can't verify, using money you can't trace, is exactly the kind of thing your sister would use to argue that you're not competent to manage the estate. It would look like you panicked and sold for far less than fair value. Elena felt the trap closing around her. Every option seemed designed to prove she couldn't handle this. Accepting Kensington's offer made her look incompetent. Refusing it and pursuing authentication made her look greedy or suspicious. Involving family made her vulnerable to legal challenges. Excluding family made her look like she was hiding something. What am I supposed to do? Her voice cracked on the last word. You proceed carefully and methodically with proper authentication. You ignore unsolicited offers. You document everything you do and every decision you make. And you trust that your grandfather knew what he was doing when he left this to you. After hanging up, Elena sat in the dark motel room and watched Maya sleep. Her daughter's face was peaceful, unaware of the complexity their lives had just become. Unaware that her mother was sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars that couldn't be touched, couldn't be spent, couldn't do anything except generate problems. The next morning brought more visitors. Marcus arrived first, her brother who she hadn't seen in 3 years. He showed up with his wife, a woman named Jennifer who Elena had met exactly once at their wedding. They were driving a new Tesla, which told Elena everything about how the last 3 years had treated them. Marcus approached with the same false warmth Rebecca had brought, explaining that he'd heard about the inheritance and wanted to reconnect. He had suggestions about property development, about tax strategies, about investment opportunities that would maximize the value for everyone. Elena listened politely and told him she'd think about it, knowing she wouldn't. Aunt Carmen arrived an hour later with 2 of Elena's cousins who she barely remembered. Carmen had aged badly, her face hardened by years of disapproval and judgment. She made no pretense of warmth. We need to talk about Arturo's estate, about what's fair and what's right. The estate was settled according to his wishes. It's already fair and right. His wishes that cut out his entire family except you? That's not what Arturo would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. He was old, Elena. Confused. Probably manipulated by that attorney who stands to profit from all this. He was 91 and sharp as ever. The attorney has documentation. Documentation can be challenged. And if it comes to that, if we have to go to court to protect Arturo's real intentions, then that's what we'll do. But it would be so much easier if you just agreed to split everything fairly among family. Elena looked at this woman who'd told her at her mother's funeral that poverty was a choice, who'd refused to help when Elena was sleeping in her car, who'd written her off as a failure and an embarrassment. Get off my property. This isn't your property yet. The estate is still being settled. Actually, it is my property. The deed was transferred 3 days ago. You're trespassing. Elena pulled out her phone and called the security guard. He appeared from the outbuilding within seconds, a large man with the kind of presence that suggested military or law enforcement background. These people are leaving. Carmen's face went red with rage. You're making a terrible mistake. We're trying to help you, and you're too stupid to see it. When this all falls apart, when you lose everything because you don't know what you're doing, don't come crying to us. They left in a convoy of expensive cars, kicking up gravel and dust. Elena watched them go and felt something crystallize inside her chest. These people didn't love her. They didn't care about Maya. They cared about money they thought they deserved simply for existing, for sharing blood with a man who'd chosen to give his legacy to someone else. Her grandfather had seen that, had watched them from a distance just as he'd watched her, and he decided she was the one worth saving. She wouldn't let them take that from her. Wouldn't let their greed or their legal threats or their accusations of incompetence destroy what he'd spent 40 years protecting. That afternoon, 3 more appraisers arrived at different times, all of them referred by Dr. Chun. They examined the collection with the same reverent care, made the same astonished comments about pieces they thought were lost or destroyed, gave the same preliminary valuations that ranged from conservative to astronomical. By evening, Elena had 5 expert opinions confirming that the collection was authentic and valuable beyond her ability to comprehend. She had documentation, photographs, preliminary appraisals, insurance quotes, and a growing understanding of exactly how complicated her life was about to become. She also had security footage of her family members showing up uninvited, making threats, demanding access to something that wasn't theirs. Whitmore had advised her to document everything, and she was learning to think like someone who expected to defend their choices in court. That night, back at the motel with Maya already asleep, Elena received an email from Rebecca. It was lengthy and detailed, outlining all the reasons why the estate should be divided equally among Arturo's grandchildren. It cited legal precedents, questioned the validity of a will that excluded so many family members, suggested that Elena's relationship with their grandfather had been manipulated or coerced. At the bottom was a formal notice. Rebecca and Marcus were filing a petition to contest the will and freeze the estate pending judicial review. Elena read the email 3 times, then forwarded it to Whitmore with a simple message: "They're doing it." His response came within minutes. "Expected. We'll fight it and we'll win. But it's going to be expensive and it's going to take time. Prepare yourself." She closed the laptop and looked at Maya, sleeping peacefully in the other bed. At this child who deserved so much better than what the world had given her. At this daughter who'd survived poverty with grace and was now about to be dragged through a legal battle over wealth she didn't understand. Elena thought about her grandfather's letter, about his regret over silence and distance, about how he'd waited too long to bridge the gap with people he loved. She thought about how he'd chosen her specifically, had trusted her to protect what he'd built, had believed she was strong enough to withstand exactly this kind of attack. And she thought about the glass in the vault beneath the factory floor, 437 pieces of beauty created over 40 years, each one a testament to the belief that making something perfect was worth any cost. Tomorrow she'd start fighting back. Tomorrow she'd hire the lawyers and the experts and the people who could help her prove that her grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he chose her. Tomorrow she'd show her family that underestimating her had been their biggest mistake. But tonight, she sat in a cheap motel room with her daughter, sleeping nearby, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd been given. Not just money, but trust. Not just wealth, but validation that she mattered, that her struggles hadn't been invisible, that someone had seen her and decided she deserved to be saved. The glass waited in the darkness beneath the factory, patient and perfect, and worth more than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. Her family circled like predators, ready to tear apart anything she tried to build. And Elena Rodriguez, who'd survived 2 years of homelessness without breaking, who'd kept her daughter safe and fed and loved through poverty that would have destroyed lesser people, prepared for the fight of her life. The vault had been opened. The treasure had been found. Now came the hard part, keeping it. The legal papers arrived by courier on a gray morning that seemed designed for bad news. Elena signed for them in the motel parking lot while Maya ate breakfast inside, shielded from the reality of what was happening. The envelope was thick, official, marked with the seal of the New Jersey Superior Court. Inside were 43 pages of legal arguments explaining why Elena Rodriguez was unfit to inherit her grandfather's estate. She read them sitting in the car, her coffee going cold in the cup holder. Rebecca and Marcus had hired serious lawyers, the kind with prestigious firm names and hourly rates that would bankrupt most people. They'd crafted their argument carefully, building a case that managed to avoid outright accusations while implying everything. Arturo Rodriguez had been 91 and isolated. He'd had minimal contact with family in his final years. The only person he'd maintained any relationship with was Elena, who'd been struggling financially and might have exerted undue influence. The will itself was suspiciously specific, leaving everything to Elena and her daughter while excluding all other grandchildren. And most damningly, the existence of a hidden vault worth hundreds of millions of dollars, conveniently discovered immediately after the property transferred to Elena's name, suggested either fraud or manipulation or both. The petition requested that the court freeze all assets, appoint an independent executor to manage the estate during litigation, and potentially redistribute the inheritance equally among all of Arturo's grandchildren if the current will was found to be the product of undue influence or diminished capacity. Thomas Whitmore called an hour later. "You've seen the petition." "I've seen it. It's theatrical nonsense, designed to pressure you into settling. The legal theory is weak. Your grandfather's attorney can testify to his mental competence. The will was properly executed with witnesses. There's no evidence of undue influence beyond their speculation. But it's going to be expensive to fight. Very expensive. And time-consuming. They know that, Elena. They're counting on you not being able to afford a prolonged legal battle. They think you'll settle for a fraction of the inheritance just to make this go away. Elena watched Maya through the motel window, her daughter carefully arranging her stuffed animals on the bed in some complex game only she understood. One of my options. We fight it. I'll connect you with litigation specialists who can handle this kind of challenge. We'll need medical records proving your grandfather's competence, testimony from people who interacted with him in his final years, documentation of the timeline showing you had no contact with him until after his death. We build an overwhelming case that destroys their theory completely. How long will that take? 6 months to a year. Possibly longer if they appeal. And how much will it cost? Whitmore's pause told her everything. Realistically, $200,000. Possibly more if it goes to trial. $200,000 that Elena didn't have. $200,000 to defend her right to something her grandfather had explicitly given her. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. What if I can't afford that? Then you find someone who can. You borrow against the collection's value. You find investors who will front the costs in exchange for a percentage. You do whatever it takes to protect what's yours. After hanging up, Elena made a decision. She couldn't live in limbo for a year, couldn't keep Maya in a motel room while lawyers argued about things that should have been simple. She needed to move forward, needed to act, needed to do something that would shift the momentum in her direction. She called Dr. Patricia Chun. You mentioned auction houses that might front authentication costs. Can you set up meetings? Of course. How soon? As soon as possible. The first auction house representative arrived the next day. His name was Jonathan Price from Sotheby's Contemporary Glass Department, and he carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who'd spent his career around wealth. He examined the collection for 2 hours, taking photographs, making notes, occasionally pausing to simply stare at a piece with an expression that looked almost hungry. When he emerged from the vault, his professional composure had cracked slightly. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm prepared to make you an offer right now. Sotheby's will cover all authentication costs, provide insurance and security, market the collection globally, and guarantee a minimum realized value of $400 million at auction. In exchange, we take a 15% commission on all sales. $60 million in commission. The number made Elena dizzy. What if it sells for more than $400 million? Then we all benefit. Our commission increases, and you receive whatever the market determines the collection is worth. But the guarantee protects you from downside risk. Even if bidding is soft, even if market conditions deteriorate, you walk away with at least $400 million minus our commission. It was better than anything Elena had imagined. But she learned over the past week to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good. What's the timeline? Authentication takes 4 to 6 months with the right experts, which we'll coordinate. Marketing and catalog preparation takes another 2 months. We'd schedule the auction for next spring, probably April or May, when the serious collectors are most active. You'd see money in your account within 30 days of the sale. 10 to 12 months. A year of her life spent in legal limbo, fighting her family, trying to survive on loans and borrowed money while the wheels of the art world turn slowly. And during that time, while the collection is being authenticated and prepared for auction, we can arrange an advance against the guaranteed minimum. Standard terms are 50% of the guarantee at 10% interest, secured by the collection itself. $200 million at 10% interest. More money than Elena could comprehend, available while the process played out. What if my family's legal challenge succeeds? What if a court decides the will was invalid? Price's expression sobered. Then the advance would need to be repaid from the estate, and the collection would be distributed according to whatever the court decides. But Ms. Rodriguez, I've reviewed the basics of your case with our legal team. The challenge your family has filed is weak. Courts are reluctant to overturn explicit testamentary wishes without compelling evidence of fraud or incapacity. You have that evidence on your side. Elena met with 3 more auction houses over the next 2 days. Christie's, Bonham's, and a specialized firm called Heritage Glass Auctions. Each made similar offers with minor variations in commission rates, guarantee amounts, and advance terms. Each representative spent hours in the vault and emerged looking like they'd witnessed something sacred. The best offer came from Heritage Glass Auctions, a smaller firm that specialized exclusively in art glass. Their representative was a woman in her 50s named Claire Donovan, who'd known Arturo Rodriguez personally during his years in the public art world. "I attended his last exhibition in 2001, Claire explained, sitting across from Elena in the motel room, while Maya colored quietly on the bed. It was at a gallery in Venice during the Biennale. The pieces sold out within hours. I remember watching collectors literally argue over who had the right to purchase certain works. Your grandfather could have named any price, could have produced pieces for the rest of his life and become wealthier than Chihuly. Instead, he disappeared. Why would he do that if his work was so valuable? Because he was an artist, not a businessman. Because creating perfect pieces required solitude and focus that public success made impossible. Because he'd rather make work that satisfied his own standards than meet the demands of collectors who saw his art as investment vehicles." Claire pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it to show photographs of pieces from that final exhibition. "I've been waiting 20 years to see more Rodriguez work. The fact that his private collection exists, that he preserved his best pieces for someone he trusted, is the most important art discovery of the decade." Heritage's offer was aggressive. They guaranteed $450 million at auction, charged only 12% commission, and offered a 60% advance at 8% interest. More money up front, better terms, lower cost. But what convinced Elena was something Claire said as she was leaving. "Your grandfather created these pieces because he believed beauty mattered, because he thought making something perfect was its own justification. I promise you that Heritage will honor that intention. We won't market this collection as some treasure trove discovery story. We'll present it as what it is. The life's work of a master craftsman who chose to give his legacy to his granddaughter because he trusted her to understand its value." Elena signed with Heritage Glass Auctions the following Monday. The contract was 40 pages of dense legal language that Whitmore reviewed carefully before approving. The advance of $270 million hit Elena's newly opened bank account 72 hours later. She stared at the number on her phone's banking app for a solid minute, unable to make her brain accept that it was real. $270 million. More money than she'd earn in 1,000 lifetimes. And it was just the advance, just a fraction of what the collection would ultimately bring. The first thing she did was pay off every debt she had. The back rent on the apartment she'd been evicted from, though she no longer needed it. The credit cards she'd maxed out buying groceries and gas. The medical bills from when Maya had gotten pneumonia 2 years ago and Elena hadn't had insurance. All of it gone in a series of electronic transfers that took less than 10 minutes. The second thing she did was hire the best legal team Whitmore could recommend. 3 lawyers from a Philadelphia firm that specialized in estate litigation, with hourly rates that would have horrified her a week ago, but now seemed almost reasonable. They filed a response to Rebecca and Marcus's petition that was devastating in its precision, dismantling every argument, presenting overwhelming evidence of Arturo's competence, documenting the timeline that proved Elena had no contact with her grandfather until after his death. The third thing she did was find a home. Not a mansion, not some ostentatious display of wealth, but a real house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. For bedrooms in a quiet town 30 minutes from the factory, with a yard and a porch and a kitchen big enough for Maya to do homework at the table. She paid cash, closed in 2 weeks, and moved in with furniture she picked out herself from stores she'd only ever walked past before. Maya got her own room for the first time in her life. Elena helped her arrange her stuffed animals on the bed, hang her drawings on the walls, organize her library books on shelves that actually belonged to them. Her daughter moved through the space with cautious wonder, touching everything gently as if it might disappear. "Mom, is this really ours? Forever? Forever, baby. And nobody can make us leave? Nobody. This is our home." Maya was quiet for a long moment, standing in the center of her room, taking it all in. Then she turned to Elena with tears streaming down her face. "I thought we'd live in the car forever." Elena pulled her close and let them both cry, these complicated tears of relief and grief for all the nights in parking lots, all the mornings waking up cold and cramped, all the times Maya had been brave when she should have just been allowed to be a child. The legal battle stretched through fall and into winter. Rebecca and Marcus fought hard, filing motion after motion, demanding depositions and document production, trying to find anything that would support their theory of undue influence. Their lawyers were aggressive, making accusations in court filings that bordered on defamation, suggesting Elena had manipulated a dying old man for financial gain. But Elena's legal team was better. They produced medical records showing Arturo had been cognitively sharp until his death. They deposed his doctor, his attorney, the few neighbors who'd interacted with him, all testifying to his competence and his explicit intentions. They presented evidence of Rebecca and Marcus's own behavior. The borrowed money never repaid, the years of no contact, the sudden interest only after learning about the inheritance. Most damningly, they produced a second letter from Arturo, one he'd left with his attorney specifically in case the will was challenged. Elena read it in Whitmore's office, her hands shaking. "To any court examining my testamentary wishes, I am Arturo Vicente Rodriguez, of sound mind and clear intention. I leave my property and everything it contains to Elena Maria Rodriguez and her daughter Maya, because they deserve it, and because I trust Elena to understand what truly matters. I watched my other grandchildren become people I did not recognize. People who measured worth in dollars rather than character. People who took without giving, who demanded without earning, who believed inheritance was an entitlement rather than a gift. I watched Elena struggle and survive. I watched her raise her daughter alone with dignity when others abandoned her. I watched her give what little she had to others, even when she could barely feed herself. She reminded me of my wife, my Isabella, who believed kindness was its own reward. If my other grandchildren challenge this will, let the court understand, I excluded them intentionally and with full knowledge of what I was doing. They deserve nothing from me because they never understood that wealth means nothing without character to guide it. Elena earns this inheritance every day by being the kind of person Isabella would have loved, by being the kind of person I should have been courageous enough to know while I was alive. If you're reading this in court, Rebecca, Marcus, Carmen, know that I saw who you truly were, and I chose to give my life's work to someone better. Arturo Vicente Rodriguez, executed before witnesses, notarized, legally binding. The letter destroyed Rebecca and Marcus's case completely. Their lawyers tried to question its authenticity, but the notarization was solid, the witnesses credible, the timeline clear. It had been written and executed 2 years before Arturo's death, long before Elena had any knowledge of the inheritance. The judge hearing the case scheduled a hearing in early December. Elena attended with her legal team, sitting in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and legal books, while Rebecca and Marcus sat across the aisle with their lawyers, refusing to make eye contact. The hearing lasted less than an hour. The judge reviewed the evidence, read Arturo's second letter aloud in a courtroom that had gone absolutely silent, and delivered her ruling without hesitation. The will is valid. The testator was of sound mind and body. His intentions were explicit and properly documented. The challenge is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Ms. Rodriguez's ownership of the estate is confirmed. This court finds the challenge to have been without merit and awards legal fees to the prevailing party. Rebecca and Marcus would have to pay Elena's legal costs. Every hour their lawyers had billed, every expert witness, every filing fee, all of it would come out of their pockets instead of the estate. Elena watched them leave the courtroom, Rebecca's face red with fury, Marcus refusing to look at her. They'd spent 6 months trying to take what wasn't theirs, and they'd ended up worse off than when they started. She felt no joy in their defeat, only a hollow kind of relief. These were people she'd once considered family, people she'd loved and trusted and believed would help her when she needed it. Learning they were capable of such cruelty had hurt more than the poverty ever had. The authentication process continued through winter and into early spring. Teams of experts descended on the factory, conducting scientific tests on glass composition, documenting techniques and materials, establishing provenance through comparison with known Rodriguez works, compiling a comprehensive catalog that would accompany the auction. Dr. Patricia Chun led the effort, coordinating specialists in chemistry, art history, and glassblowing techniques. They discovered pieces that had been thought lost or destroyed, works that had been missing from the historical record for decades. They documented techniques Arturo had developed that were unique to his work, signatures in the glass itself that proved authenticity beyond any doubt. The final authentication report was 300 pages long. It confirmed that all 437 pieces were genuine Rodriguez works created between 1966 and 2006. It documented their historical significance, their technical excellence, their artistic merit, and it revised the estimated value upward to $520 million based on recent sales of comparable works. Claire Donovan called Elena personally to deliver the news. We're looking at the most significant art glass auction in history. The interest from collectors has been extraordinary. We've had inquiries from museums, private collectors, corporations wanting centerpiece works for headquarters. This is going to be remarkable. The auction was scheduled for April 15th at Heritage's Manhattan Galleries. Claire and her team spent months preparing, creating a catalog that was itself a work of art, documenting each piece with professional photography and scholarly essays. They planned exhibition previews in New York, London, and Hong Kong, giving serious collectors the chance to view the works in person. Elena flew to New York in early April for the preview exhibition. She brought Maya, now 8 years old, and enrolled in a private school where she was thriving. They stayed at a hotel that overlooked Central Park, and Elena tried not to think about how a single night's cost was more than she used to make in a month. The exhibition was held in Heritage's galleries in Midtown, a space designed specifically for showing high-value art. The Rodriguez collection filled 3 rooms, each piece lit professionally, positioned to show its colors and details to maximum effect. The cobalt blue vase Maya had claimed was there too, though it wouldn't be sold. Elena had formally withdrawn it from the auction, honoring her promise that they'd keep it. The preview opening was black tie, attended by collectors and museum curators and art critics whose names Elena recognized from research. She wore a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, simple and elegant, trying to look like she belonged among people who spent millions on art without thinking twice. Maya wore a dress too, navy blue with white trim, her hair carefully braided. She held Elena's hand as they walked through the galleries, looking at the glass pieces her great-grandfather had made, at the crowds of wealthy people examining them with careful attention. "Mom, are all these people going to buy Abuelo Arturo's art?" "They're going to try, baby. But there are more people than pieces, so they'll have to bid against each other. And whoever pays the most gets to take it home. That's how auctions work." Maya considered this seriously. That seems sad. Abuelo made these to be beautiful, not to be bought and sold. Elena knelt down to her daughter's level. There in the gallery, surrounded by hundreds of millions of dollars in art glass. "You're right. He did make them to be beautiful, but he also made them for us, for you and me, so we could have a better life. And selling them to people who'll appreciate them, who'll take care of them. That's how we honor what he gave us." David Kensington approached them near the end of the evening. Elena recognized him from photographs Claire had shown her. The British collector who'd called months ago offering $400 million for the entire collection. He was in his 60s, distinguished in the way wealthy Englishmen often are, with silver hair and clothes that probably cost more than most cars. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm delighted to finally meet you in person. And this must be Maya." Elena stood, placing herself slightly between Kensington and her daughter. "Mr. Kensington, I wanted to apologize for my earlier approach. Calling you out of the blue, making unsolicited offers. It was poor form. I was simply so excited by the possibility of acquiring your grandfather's work that I lost perspective. You offered $400 million for the collection. I did, and I'm sure you're now aware that was likely well below fair value. For what it's worth, I'm prepared to bid aggressively at auction. The Oceanic series alone is worth whatever it takes to acquire it. Why do you want it so badly? Kensington looked around the gallery at the assembled pieces, his expression softening. Because your grandfather was the finest glassblower of his generation. Because these pieces represent the pinnacle of an art form most people don't even realize exists. Because owning them would mean preserving them, protecting them, ensuring they're appreciated by people who understand their significance. He paused. And because I'm 63 years old, quite wealthy, and I'd like to leave behind something that matters. A collection in my name that will outlive me and bring beauty into the world long after I'm gone. It was honest in a way Elena hadn't expected. Not just about wealth or investment, but about legacy and meaning and the human need to create something that lasts. There will be other bidders, Elena said. I'm counting on it. Competition brings out the best in everyone. The auction was held on a Tuesday morning, New York time. Heritage had arranged for live bidding in the galleries, telephone bidding for remote collectors, and online bidding through a secure platform. The room was packed with collectors and dealers and museum representatives, all of them holding numbered paddles, all of them ready to spend fortunes. Elena sat in the front row with Maya, Claire Donovan beside them, watching as the auctioneer took his place at the podium. The first piece to be sold was a small vessel in amber and gold, dated 1974, estimated value between $80,000 and $100,000. The bidding opened at $75,000 and escalated quickly. Paddles rose around the room. Telephone bidders placed offers. The online platform registered bids in real time. The price climbed past the estimate, past $200,000, settling finally at $275,000. For a piece that Elena had walked past dozens of times in the vault without giving it special attention. The pattern repeated with the next piece and the next. Every item sold above estimate, often well above. The serious collectors were competing aggressively, driving prices higher and higher. Museums were bidding too, acquiring pieces for permanent collections with funds from wealthy donors who wanted their names on plaques. The Oceanic series came up mid-morning. Claire had explained that this was the crown jewel of the collection, 12 pieces in shades of blue and green that seemed to contain actual water inside the glass. They'd been shown at the Corning Museum in 1989, thought lost in a transport fire, and now revealed to have been in Arturo's private collection all along. The auctioneers started the bidding at $5 million for the complete series. The room erupted. Paddles shot up. Telephone bidders called in offers. The online platform lit up with competing bids. The price climbed in $500,000 increments, past $10 million, past 20, past 30. Elena watched in stunned silence as people she'd never met fought to own something her grandfather had made decades ago. The bidding slowed around $40 million, 3 remaining bidders trading offers back and forth. David Kensington was one of them, his paddle rising with calm determination every time someone else bid. The final price was $42 million. Kensington had won, and he looked genuinely happy about it, like a child who'd just received the perfect birthday gift. The auction continued through lunch and into the afternoon. Every single piece sold. Not a single item failed to meet its reserve price. The running total displayed on screens around the room climbed steadily upward, past the guaranteed minimum of $450 million, past $500 million, past the revised estimate of $520 million. When the final piece sold, a massive sculpture in crimson and gold that had been created in 2006, Arturo's last documented work, the total stood at $567 million. The room erupted in applause. Collectors and dealers and museum representatives, all standing, all acknowledging that they'd just witnessed something historic. The largest art glass auction ever held. The validation of Arturo Rodriguez as one of the masters of his craft. The transformation of a hidden legacy into public heritage. Elena sat frozen in her chair, unable to process the number. $567 million. minus Heritage's 12% commission of $68 million, leaving her with $499 million, plus the advance she'd already received, minus the interest that had accrued. When the accounting was complete, when all the fees and costs were tallied, Elena Rodriguez would have approximately $512 million. Claire hugged her tightly, tears in both their eyes. Your grandfather would be so proud. That evening, after Maya was asleep in their hotel room, Elena stood at the window, looking out over Manhattan. The city glittered beneath her, millions of lights marking lives being lived, struggles being survived, dreams being pursued or abandoned. She thought about the studio apartment with the eviction notice, about the 2006 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles, about Maya splitting her lunch because she knew there wasn't always enough, about the parking lots and the fear and the exhaustion that had defined their lives for so long. All it was over now, permanently, irrevocably over. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. The first communication in months. I saw the auction results. Congratulations. You must be very pleased with yourself. Elena didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like gloating, and she'd learned that victory didn't require her to rub it in. Rebecca had tried to take what wasn't hers and had failed. That was consequence enough. She thought instead about what to do with the money. $500 million was more than she could spend in a lifetime, more than Maya could spend in her lifetime. It was wealth that demanded purpose beyond personal comfort. She remembered Dr. Chen's suggestion about donating pieces to museums, about honoring Arturo's legacy by making his work accessible to people who'd never be able to afford it otherwise. The auction was done. The pieces sold to private collectors who'd keep them in homes and vaults where only select guests would see them. But that didn't mean Elena couldn't do something that mattered. She called Claire the next morning. I want to start a foundation, something that supports art education, helps working artists afford materials and studio space, provides scholarships for students who want to study glassblowing. Can you help me set that up? Of course. How much are you thinking of funding it with? Elena did the math quickly. She'd keep enough to ensure she and Maya would be secure forever, that they'd never have to worry about rent or food or medical bills or any of the thousand small cruelties of poverty. The rest could do something meaningful. $200 million. To start. More later if it makes sense. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Elena, that would be one of the largest private art foundations in the country. You could change thousands of lives. My grandfather changed mine. I want to pass that forward. The Arturo and Isabella Rodriguez Foundation for Glass Arts was established 3 months later. Elena served as president, Claire Donovan as executive director, Dr. Patricia Chun as chief curator. They funded scholarships for art students, provided grants to working artists, established residency programs where glassblowers could work without worrying about costs. They also began acquiring pieces for a permanent collection that would be displayed in a museum they'd build in Mullica Hill, on the land where Arturo's factory had stood. The building would be designed by a prestigious architectural firm, a modern structure with walls of glass that would honor what Arturo and Isabella had created there decades ago. The factory itself would be partially preserved as a historical site. The vault beneath the floor maintained exactly as Arturo had left it, a reminder of how something precious could survive fire and time and loss. Elena kept working despite having wealth that made employment unnecessary. She enrolled in community college, taking business courses so she'd understand how to manage the foundation properly. She learned about nonprofit governance, about grant-making, about the difference between charity and investment in human potential. Maya thrived in her new school, making friends, joining clubs, discovering that she loved science and math, and wanted to be an aerospace engineer when she grew up. She kept the cobalt blue vase in her room, positioned where morning light would hit it and throw blue-gold patterns across her walls. Sometimes Elena would find her daughter sitting quietly, just looking at it, and she'd ask what Maya was thinking about Abuelo Arturo, about how he made this and kept it safe for us, about how something so beautiful came from someone I never got to meet. Do you wish you'd known him? Maya considered the question seriously. I wish I'd met him, but I feel like I know him anyway, because of what he made and what he gave us, and because you tell me stories about what he wrote in his letters. Elena had framed Arturo's letter, the one where he'd apologized for walking away and explained his regrets. It hung in her study where she could see it every day, a reminder that silence and distance were choices that could be corrected, that it was never too late to reach across the gap toward people you loved. She'd also framed the photograph from the vault, the one showing Arturo and Isabella standing together in the factory's working days, surrounded by glowing furnaces and molten glass. They looked happy in that image, young and strong, and committed to building something beautiful together. That was the legacy Elena wanted to honor. Not just the money, though that mattered, but the belief that creating something perfect was worth any cost, that beauty had value beyond price, that protecting what mattered required courage and planning and the willingness to make hard choices. 2 years after the auction, Elena received a call from an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Daniel Rodriguez. We've never met, but I'm your grandfather's cousin's son. I guess that makes us second cousins." Elena's guard went up immediately. "What do you want?" "Nothing. I promise. I just wanted to tell you something. I was at your grandfather's funeral. I was the only family member who came, actually, and after the service, he was already gone by then. I was talking to his attorney about estate matters, just curious about what would happen to the factory. And Mr. Whitmore told me Arturo had left very specific instructions about who should inherit." "Okay." "He said Arturo had been very clear that it should go to you, that you'd earned it by being the kind of person who gave without keeping score. And I asked how Arturo knew that, since none of us had much contact with him. And Mr. Whitmore said Arturo had been watching all of us for years. He'd go to family events and stay in the background, just observing, seeing who we really were when we thought no one was paying attention." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know that. None of us did. But it means he saw everything. He saw Rebecca and Marcus borrow money and never repay it. He saw them dismiss you when you needed help. He saw the way they treated your struggles as character flaws instead of circumstances. And he decided you were the only one worth saving. Why are you telling me this? Because what Rebecca and Marcus did, trying to contest the will, trying to take what he'd left for you, that was exactly the behavior Arturo was protecting you from. He knew they'd do it. That's why he left that second letter, why he documented everything so carefully. He wanted to make sure that, even after he was gone, he could still defend his choice." Daniel's voice softened. "I just wanted you to know that it wasn't random or arbitrary. He chose you specifically because he believed you deserved it. And from everything I've seen about what you've done with the foundation, about how you're honoring his work and helping other artists, I think he chose right." After hanging up, Elena sat in her study looking at the framed photograph of Arturo and Isabella. She'd spent 2 years wondering why he'd chosen her, why he'd trusted a granddaughter he barely knew with the legacy of his life's work. Now she understood. He'd been watching. He'd seen who she was when circumstances were hardest, when she'd had every excuse to become bitter or cruel or selfish. And he decided that person was worth believing in. The museum opened 4 years after the auction, a stunning building of steel and glass that rose from the land where Arturo's factory had stood. The design won architectural awards, but what mattered most to Elena was how light moved through the space, how the glass walls seemed to dissolve the boundary between interior and exterior, how visitors could stand inside and feel connected to the landscape beyond. The permanent collection included pieces from the auction that the foundation had acquired, works that museums and private collectors had donated or loaned, and new pieces by contemporary glassblowers funded through foundation grants. It was a living museum, constantly evolving, celebrating not just Arturo's legacy, but the art form he dedicated his life to mastering. The opening ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, museum directors and art critics and collectors who'd bid at the auction, students who'd received foundation scholarships, artists who'd been given residencies, members of the Mullica Hill community who remembered when the factory had been operational and were grateful to see the land restored to beauty. Rebecca and Marcus weren't invited. Elena had considered it briefly, wondered if extending an olive branch might heal the wounds, but decided that some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. They tried to steal from her and Maya, had accused her of fraud and manipulation, had spent months trying to destroy what Arturo had built. She didn't need their approval or their presence. She'd built something meaningful without them. The cobalt blue vase was there, though, displayed in a place of honor in the entrance gallery. Maya had agreed to loan it to the museum permanently, with the understanding that it would always be identified as on loan from the Rodriguez family collection, not for sale. Elena stood in that entrance gallery during the opening, Maya beside her, now 12 years old and already showing signs of the woman she'd become. Smart and kind and strong, with her mother's determination and her great-grandfather's belief that creating something beautiful mattered. "Mom, do you think Abuelo would like this?" Elena looked around at the museum, at the people moving through galleries examining glass art, at the students sketching pieces for their own work, at the light pouring through walls that seemed made of captured sky. "Yeah, baby, I think he'd love it." That night, after the ceremony, after the speeches and the champagne and the congratulations, Elena returned to the museum alone. She used her key to enter through the staff entrance, walked through galleries lit only by security lighting, and descended into the vault that had been preserved beneath the main floor. It was exactly as Arturo had left it. The wooden table in the center, the photographs on the walls, the journal resting where Elena had first found it. The only difference was that now the space was empty of glass, all the pieces sold or donated or displayed in the museum above. She sat on the floor where she'd sat 4 years earlier with Maya, when they'd first discovered the collection and understood that their lives were about to change. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, about legal battles and authentication processes and auctions that defied belief, about family betrayals and new alliances, about learning to trust herself when everyone around her suggested she wasn't capable. She thought about her grandfather, about how he'd spent 40 years creating beauty in isolation, protecting it in silence, waiting for the right person to give it to, about how he'd chosen her despite barely knowing her, had trusted that the person he'd observed from a distance would understand the gift he was offering. And she thought about Maya, sleeping peacefully in the house they owned, in a room with the blue vase that caught morning light, in a life they'd built on the foundation of Arturo's belief that Elena deserved better. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the empty vault, of the space that had held $500 million in glass, and now held only memory and possibility. She sent it to Claire with a simple message. "This is where it started." Claire's response came within minutes. "And look at what you built from it." Elena stood, brushed dust from her clothes, and climbed back up into the museum. She walked through the galleries one more time, looking at each piece, reading the placard information, watching how light interacted with glass in ways that seemed almost magical. She stopped in front of a piece titled Inheritance, created by a young artist who'd received one of the foundation's first grants. It was a vessel in shades of amber and gold, with threads of cobalt blue woven through it, clearly influenced by Arturo's techniques, but uniquely the artist's own vision. The placard read, "Created with support from the Arturo and Isabella Rodriguez Foundation. This piece honors the legacy of master glassblower Arturo Rodriguez and his belief that art transforms lives." Elena stood there for a long time, looking at that piece, understanding what her grandfather had really given her. Not just money, though that had changed everything. Not just security, though that mattered immensely. But permission to believe that she mattered, that her struggles hadn't been invisible, that someone had seen her and decided she was worth saving. He'd given her the chance to prove that his faith wasn't misplaced. And she'd spent 4 years doing exactly that, building something that honored his memory while helping others the way he'd helped her. She thought about the letter he'd written, about his regrets over silence and distance, about how he'd wished he'd been braver, had reached out sooner, had connected with the people he loved before it was too late. But he had reached out, maybe not in the way either of them would have preferred, not with conversations or shared meals or the ordinary building blocks of family relationships. But he'd reached across decades of silence with a gift so profound it had transformed her life completely. And she'd accepted it, had fought for it, had protected it from people who want to take it, had used it to build something that would outlast them both. That was the inheritance that mattered. Not the glass or the money, but the belief that even when silence stretched too long, even when distance seemed unbridgeable, connection was still possible. Love was still possible. Redemption was still possible. Elena left the museum as sunrise painted the glass walls with shades of amber and gold. She drove home through quiet streets, past the house that was theirs forever, and found Maya awake early, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, preparing for a test. "Mom, you're up early. Couldn't sleep. Wanted to walk through the museum one more time. Is it perfect?" Elena thought about that question, about perfection and beauty and the belief that creating something meaningful was worth any cost. "Yeah, baby, it's perfect." She made breakfast while Maya studied, scrambled eggs and toast and fruit, the kind of meal she'd once had to ration carefully and now could make without thinking about cost. They ate together at the table, talking about Maya's test and the museum opening and plans for the weekend. Ordinary conversation, ordinary moments, the kind of simple, peaceful morning that Elena had once thought she'd never have. But she had it now, because a grandfather she'd barely known had watched from a distance and decided she deserved better. Because he'd spent 40 years creating beauty and protecting it and saving it for someone he believed would understand its value. Because sometimes, rarely, impossibly, the universe gave you exactly what you needed when you needed it most. Not through luck or chance, but through the deliberate choice of someone who'd seen you struggling and decided you were worth saving. The glass caught morning light through the kitchen window, throwing patterns across the walls. Blue and gold, amber and crimson, all the colors Arturo had captured inside his art, now living in the house he'd made possible. Maya finished her breakfast and gathered her books, ready for school. Elena walked her to the door, kissed her forehead, watched her daughter climb onto the bus that would take her to a future full of possibilities that had once seemed impossible. And Elena Rodriguez, who'd been homeless 4 years ago, who'd slept in a car and worked double shifts and been told by her own family that she deserved her poverty, stood in the doorway of her home and felt what her grandfather had wanted her to feel all along. Not just wealthy, not just secure, but worthy, seen, loved by someone who'd watched from a distance and decided she mattered. The factory stood empty now, transformed into a museum, the vault beneath it preserved as a reminder of what had been hidden and what had been found. The glass was scattered across the world, owned by collectors and museums, bringing beauty into spaces her grandfather would never see. But his legacy lived on, in the foundation that bore his name, in the artists it supported, in the students it trained, in the museum that celebrated his work and the work of others he'd inspired. And most importantly, in the granddaughter and great-granddaughter he'd saved, who'd taken his gift and built something that honored not just what he'd made, but who he'd been. A man who believed beauty mattered, who thought creating something perfect was worth any sacrifice, who'd spent 40 years in isolation protecting his art, waiting for the right moment to pass it on, who'd chosen well. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story/document.